Hello and welcome to the Classical Guitar Practice Room. I'm James Caldwell. In this video we're looking at an easy piece of repertoire. It's Carulli's Waltz from his Waltz in 3 Variations. This is the first movement. This waltz is in the key of C major and it is in 3/8 time. So we'll be counting in groups of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on, which is typical of a waltz. For this first movement, the waltz itself, everything is played in first position, and the first 2 lines are centered around 2 chords, really, C and G7. The third line moves into A minor and E or E7. So really, those are the only chords in this piece, C and G7, A minor and E7. Okay, starting in the first measure, the first bass note is a C on the 5th string. And really, if you just put down a C chord with your left hand, you can begin playing the piece. On the right hand, we'll have the thumb play the bass note. The next 2 notes in measure 1 are C and E on the 1st string and 2nd string. I recommend using the fingers M and A here. Second measure, we have our first G7 chord. It's an open D string in the bass, the 4th string. We play that with the thumb on the right hand. And the second part, we have just F on the 1st string and an open B string. Again, M and A on the right hand. And the third measure is back to the C chord. It's the same as the first measure. 5th string C in the bass, play that with the thumb on the right hand. And C and E, the first 2 strings, play that with M-A. Moving along in the 4th measure, we just have this single note walk down. D, B, G. I recommend playing that D note with the 4th finger on the left hand. Open B, open G. And the reason we use the 4th finger there is because the 3rd finger is frequently down here on the 5th string C. Also in the 4th measure, the fingering printed is I-M-I. I-M on the 2nd string, I on the 3rd string. Now to the 5th measure, we're back on the C chord. It's the same as the 1st and 3rd measures. Thumb on the 5th string and M-A on the first 2 strings. 6th measure is the G7 chord again here, D in the bass, F on top and M-A to play those top 2 strings. Now we have a single note walk up, G, A, B, and the fingering printed there is M, I, M. And the final measure of the first line is a C chord, or it's a pair of C's, an octave of C's there. So to review the first line, the thing to keep in mind here is the thumb will play the bass notes, and the fingers M and A will strike the first 2 strings for each of the chords in these 8 measures. Moving on to the second line, the first bass note is an F on the 4th string. We'll play that with the thumb. Now the 2 notes following are just the G and the B, the 3rd and 2nd string open. So we want to use I and M to come back on those in that first measure. The second measure, the second line, the bass note goes down to E on the 4th string. We add a C on the 2nd string. Again, I and M because we're plucking the 3rd and 2nd strings. The third measure here is the G7 again with D in the bass and F on the 1st string and an open B. So we're back to M-A. And the 4th measure here is C, 5th string and the first 2 strings M-A. Fifth measure is F on the bass again here, and the G and B. So I am here. Sixth measure, E in the bass, and C on the second string, and again I am. Then we have this single note walk down, but there's a bass note at the beginning. D in the bass, F, D, B, and the two C's. So in this second line, we have a combination of IM on some chords and MA on other chords. It just depends which strings we're hitting. We're keeping the right hand in the home position, where M and A will cover the first two strings, and I and M will cover strings 2 and 3. It helps keep the right hand steady. So the second line, Moving on to the third line here, it goes into A minor, and the idea here changes. We just have a simple ascending arpeggio over the A minor chord. Play the bass note with the thumb. Again, third string will be played with the I finger, second string with M, first string with A. So we have I, M, A. Second measure is the same, M, A. Now we have this meandering around here. Thumb will play the sixth string E, and it tells us to start this series of notes here with the I finger. And if you play these next two measures just going I am, I am, I am, it'll work out just fine. So we play that D with the I finger, M on the C, I on the B, next measure, M on the C, while the thumb plays that A bass note, I on the B, M on the C. So those two measures, we have an E in the bass, and then I, M, I. Then we have A in the bass, M, I, M. Without talking. And we're back to the A minor arpeggio in measure 5 and 6. And then E in the bass here with a walk down, D, C, B, and it ends with two A's. Now on this last walk down here, it tells us to start with the M finger. You begin with the M finger here, M, I, M. It sets you up to play that A note with the I finger. So the reason the I finger is indicated in the third measure is it sets you up when you walk through those two measures, alternating I, M. It sets you up to play the next A minor chord with the I finger on the third string. So here's the third line. I am A, I am A, I am, I am, I am, I am A, I am A, M, I am I. The way this piece is arranged, each line has a repeat at the end. So we play each line twice, and at the end of the third line we have the instruction DC al fine, or al fine. And that tells us to go back to the beginning and play until we see the word fine, finish. So after playing the third line twice, you go back to the first line and you play it through once, ignore the repeat this time, and you play the second line and ignore the repeat, and there's the finish right there. That's how I played it in the opening sequence of this video. And because each of this section repeats, a very common approach would be to play the line through the first time with a more mellow tone, with the right hand fingers up here over the sound hole close to the end of the fretboard. And on the second pass, bring your hand back closer to the bridge for a brighter sound. And that will vary the tone. And although you're playing the same line twice, exactly the same, it gives the illusion that it is somehow different. Let me demonstrate here on the first line. First with a more mellow sound with the right hand fingers close to the fretboard. And now back toward the bridge. And you can do that with each repeating line. Play it once with a darker mellow tone, and on the repeat come back with a brighter, thinner sound. That will add an extra dimension to your performance and make it more interesting for the audience. Another point I'd like to make is that the bass note at the beginning of each measure is a dotted quarter note stemmed down. So that means we hold the bass note while we play the rest of the measure. So like in the first measure, we got to keep our third finger down on C while we come back on those MA fingerings on the rest of the chord. So keep your bass notes down there. We don't want to hear. Can't let it die. It needs to be there. Second measure is just a D, open string, so that's easy. And so on. In the second line, where the bass notes are on the fourth string, we're holding this F down. And we're going for the open G and B. It's also very important here to make sure that our third finger holding that F down is on its tip and is not touching the third string. A very common problem is to have the third finger slightly collapsed and it's leaning onto the third string. And you'd be getting a dead note there. So make sure your third finger is on the tip and that those other two strings can ring clearly. Similarly, in the second measure on this second line, we have an E on the fourth string. And we want to get that C second string note out and open G out while holding down that bass note through the measure. And pretty much anywhere else, I know on the first line in the fourth measure, they indicated the fourth finger to play that D. It's not indicated at the end of the second and third lines, but you would be well advised to play those Ds with your pinky, simply because the third finger is going to be coming down on the bass note at the end of that second line. On the third line, it's not so critical because we're coming into an A note there and the third finger won't be used in that last measure. But if you just play all the D notes with your pinky, it remains consistent. Well, that's about all I have to say about this waltz, which is just the first movement of a greater work. And each of the variations that follow take this basic idea, this basic chord structure, and embellish it with more interesting arpeggiation patterns and different ideas. And I'll be discussing each of those in upcoming videos, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for tuning into my channel today and for watching this video. I hope that you found the information here useful. And if you did, I'd appreciate it if you give me a like and subscribe to my channel. So stay tuned for more guitar-related videos. I'll see you next time here in the Classical Guitar Practice Room. Until then, I've been James Caldwell.